one. Now, today we have a continuation of this discussion on one of the most important issues of our time. Last time, as you recall, we talked about this issue of abortion. How did it become an issue in America? And what I told you is that historically speaking, abortion was legal in America up to the 1800s, and abortion became illegal only for the slaves. And so, but for white women, abortion was legal up until about 1910. And then we had a step taken, and then we had the Roe decision in 1973. And what caused this big uproar lately is that Justice Alito wrote a scathing opinion and basically said Roe was wrongly decided. But one of the cornerstones of that issue is that when does life begin? In Indiana, our state law, we consider a person life began at 32 weeks, although in my famous heparin cases, we had one of the babies live at 22 weeks. He's still alive, he's healthy. So it's a big debate. So to start us off today, we have a call-in person, Attorney Faith Alvarez. Attorney Alvarez, you've studied this. She's a former federal law clerk for a couple of judges. This issue about the abortion, what do you see as the satellite issues that may develop?
I think the issue of overturning Roe versus Casey. Well, first, let me ask. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So when I got to, I want to first give my opinion on the development of, by means of background, this country was kind of founded on owning a wife to produce more.
She's breaking up a lot, Nate.
You're breaking up. Your sound is breaking up, Attorney Alvarez. Hello?
See, that's what they said when I called in.
And yeah, your sound is breaking up for whatever reason, but go ahead.
Historically, owning a wife that you were producing additional exploitable labor. And so women and children were really seen as property. I think that's kind of where the rub actually begins. But abortion came to be a question in the 70s with the advancement of women's rights. So in the 70s, there wasn't advanced care for premature babies. That's why they determined that life medically and ends at birth, not. So in the 90s, medical technology advanced, and that came the decision of Casey, because at that time, medically, you could remove fetus from the mother at about 2 weeks, sit in a medical incubation, produce a life, which capitalism views as a carrying asset, essentially. So now, in 2021, 2022, medical technology has yet advanced again. They are now having, I think, a 78% success rate of incubating fetus beginning at about 18 weeks. So I think I want to just put that it's not really a moral issue legally and medically. It's actually more disgusting. It's when can we rip a fetus out of the mother and incubate it into a life that will consume and provide exploitable. So that, I believe, is actually. With that being said, I'd like to turn it around, knock it on its head a little bit, and see what we can actually get from this. So I've kind of gone through the legal rabbit hole. What might be to come if life begins at conception? So to do that, I looked at the Asian countries that believe medically, life begins at conception in those countries. The women are celebrated when they're pregnant. They're given much more support as they have life insurance and health support begins at conception. There are all kinds of different benefits mothers can get at conception, provided that there is legal support. And that is how you know in this country pregnancy is used as a means of oppression. Because here, rather than getting more freedom and more help, you're given less freedom and less help. And that's why women don't want to have babies, because we know we're about to be oppressed. It's really quite interesting how the different treatment can have an effect on the natural reproduction. Because as a woman, it's my birthright. It's my birthright to produce. And the laws just interfere with that, and they mangle it into something so unattainable and so unrealistic and unnatural. It's really quite horrible. I am both and pro-choice, I think, as I said.
So your point, Attorney Alvarez, is that in the foreign country, the women could get life insurance for the unborn baby. They get certain benefits.
Yes. I mean,
So
we're talking about if one state here were to give legal rights to a fetus at conception or at a certain week mark, we're talking about issuing them a Social Security card, providing them benefits at that time.
Well, okay, Attorney Banks, this point that she's making, if this opinion holds water and get ratified, the key point, of course, is when does life actually begin? Do you think that the idea of the unborn child receiving Social Security cards and benefits makes the decision more livable, or it just doesn't mean a lot?
Well, I think these are some provocative points that Attorney Alvarez is raising. And rather than focus on the issue of when life begins, the question from my perspective is whether a woman has the privacy right and the choice to make decisions regarding her own body. And so more than 70% of citizens oppose overturning Roe versus Wade. And one of the world's oldest and well-known medical journals this week stated that, and as we know, women will die as a result of this inhumane, irrational, and shocking Alito draft that, as you know, was issued in February of this year. And as far as we know, it is the only draft at this point that is being circulated. We also know that the Roe versus Wade decision enables safe and legal abortions. And my research this week indicated that worldwide, there are approximately 120 million unintended pregnancies, and 3/5 of them end in abortion. And only 55% of these are estimated to be safe. We also know that Black women have unintended pregnancies at a rate that's double those of non-Hispanic white women, and that Black women are have an almost three times a higher maternal mortality rate. And so I look at this as a matter of women, and agreeing with Attorney Alvarez with respect to historically women being treated as chattel. And I look at this from the perspective of a woman's right and choice over decisions with respect to her own body. And we also know that only 31% of citizens favor overturning Roe versus Wade, and more than 70% oppose overturning Roe versus Wade.
That's some pretty compelling argument. But Attorney Grimes, if life begins at conception, where do we go to in terms of, let's look at the criminal side of this matter. And now we're getting information on the internet about child support. We'll talk about the civil side, but the criminal side. So if a woman is pregnant, she smokes cigarettes, she have a drink.
Use drugs.
Use drugs. Is that now a felony or a crime? Is that child abuse?
If it's a living organ, if it's a life, that life would be entitled to the same protection as a fully grown life, I would conclude, logically speaking, Nate. So I think that you would face the same consequences if something happens to that new life. But if I may address something that Attorney Alvarez said, I was surprised that the Asian countries were mentioned as those who provide all of these services and identification of an embryo, a 2-week-old embryo, or at conception. Because I recall seeing a documentary a year or two ago about China and the one-child law that they had. If I'm incorrect, please correct me. But my fading memory these days tell me that I remember seeing almost a dump pile of corpse of dead children, of dead babies, because they were unwanted and they violated the one-child rule. And it was a horrific situation in China when somebody would have more than one child. What to do with that that resulting birth. So if this law is going to bring into effect unwanted births, abused children, I think will be on the rise. God, y'all, I represented the mother who had postpartum psychosis, who killed her child. I do know that as precious as we believe life is and babies are, if you don't want that child and you have an unwanted pregnancy, that child is going to come into the world unwanted and unloved, and we got a problem. We're going to have a problem with that. So you're going to have more abandoned children. You're going to have more of these backroom butchered abortions, where not only the fetus is going to be killed, but the mothers are going to come out of there with problems or not come out at all because of infections and deaths and people not knowing what they're doing. So I just see a downside on denying a woman the right to make a decision as to have an abortion.
One of the callers sent a text to us. What about child support obligations? If life begins at conception, when do you start paying child support now? If that's a human being, do you pay child support the full 40 weeks of gestation time period?
I would imagine whenever the services and needs of the child come into existence, that the man has an obligation to support that life. That's the best I could say.
So would that be 24 weeks in the case of Roe, or 15 weeks, which is the state law that is the subject of Alito's opinion?
I would say the obligation come into existence when the bills come for that life. I mean, if there are some pre-pregnancy bills and expenses, then I don't see anything wrong with that responsibility and duty to support that baby, if that's what we have.
Wow.
Some already do.
Can't hear.
Can't hear you.
I said I think some states do provide prenatal care as a part of child support.
Right. And it should be.
Yes.
Yeah, but the problem though is that if you determine that life begins at conception, wouldn't they have to alter child support laws in all the states now to say that you need to start paying child support at a preset date before the actual birth of the child? If you can potentially expose the mother to criminal liability, why would she get the benefit of the civil recovery aspect?
I don't do family law, Nate, but I do have some knowledge of it, because when I first started out, I tried to do it and it was too much of an emotional law for me. But I would imagine that if a woman can show that she has now, it has to change her lifestyle, has to change her living situation, her expenses has increased, that a court would award her child support.
Well, we'll get a couple of callers on. Hey, producer, let's take one of the callers and see what their thought is about this issue. Okay, caller, you have a comment about this abortion issue.
Yeah, good morning. I just think it's hypocritical for the Republicans who are steadfast on this bill. This is really not about aborting, I think, babies. It's not about aborting children. I think it's really about white women having brown babies. They're having a lot of brown babies, and they are aborting the white babies. This is a time and an era, and I'm not talking about what happened with the Roe versus Wade. I do think that I should have a choice, and I don't know how you can figure out during the gestation of the baby who the father is. If there is some kind of technology out, wouldn't that harm the baby to find out the DNA if this guy is actually the dad? And then how many times are you going to have to do that? And if the father should pay child support, then the mom that's carrying the baby should pay the child support as well. So how do you distinct between the difference? And my last comment is, if the woman does not have the right to decide if she wants to carry that baby long term, where's the rights of the father and his responsibility? There's never an outcry of the right of the father to take care of all those children that he has fathered out of wedlock. Have a good afternoon.
Wow, that was a loaded comment, Denise. Well, thank you, Denise. You raised about 20 different issues.
Yeah, she put them out there.
Yeah, a lot of different issues. I can't address all of them in the context of the show, but the one thing that she was saying about child support goes back to the benefits, and she make it on that issue about support. I think that if you determine that life begins at conception, then you have to have some type of financial outlay to the custodial parent. In that case, be the mother, would automatically be the custodial parent during that 40-week gestational time period. And so this is my analysis. I think that you would have to have some type of laws passed that is consistent with that latest court ruling. Although I don't know how long, if this passed now, as soon as one of the Republicans on the court dies and they replace him with a Democrat, I think it'll flip back anyway. But we have one more caller, then we'll get back to the discussion. Okay, caller, you have a
Hi, good morning. Good morning to you, Brother Nate and Brian. Thanks for taking my call. Just got a comment about cost of amniocentesis. Very costly. Because generally, my mother does family law, done it for decades. Generally, paternity has to be established. So I don't know who's going to pick up the cost of amniocentesis. Find out, because you're not going to pay it on your own. Trust me, that's a lot of money. Okay, to find out DNA through amniocentesis, when generally paternity needs to be established first. So that's going to be an issue there, and I see some problems if the current course is going the way that you all think it may go pre-birth and determining benefits, stuff like that. That's a costly procedure. Generally, paternity must be established first, so the courts deem cost on the non-custodial parent, because contrary to the last caller, there are a lot of men who have custody of their children. Crack era and the opioid era, I've seen it with my own eyes. There are a lot of children that have been abandoned, and a lot of men, a lot of grandparents, stuff have children nowadays. So let's throw that in the equation too. And then number two, I'm troubled by the throwing out of the equal protection clause with the Puerto Rico decision. I think the attorney commented on that for a minute. And what does that lay for us? I mean, Norris versus Powell, Nora and Powell versus Alabama, other decisions were all based on the equal protection clause. I think there's a lawsuit now. I forgot who it was. They just filed considering using the equal protection clause. So where you guys see that going? Because that was a critical clause in getting a lot of change and a lot of laws changed for our benefit. Thanks for taking my call.
Well, I'll let my panel respond, but let me explain to the audience what this amniocentesis is. That's a medical procedure used primarily in prenatal diagnosis of chromosome abnormality and fetal infection, as well as sex determination. In this procedure, the way I understand it, a small amount of amniotic fluid, which contains fetal tissue, is sampled from the amniotic sacs surrounding the developing fetus or the baby. So they take this out and they can do a scientific test on it. And they also have other mechanisms like ultrasound. But having said that, the callers make a lot of points today. So where we start with Attorney Banks?
I think that the caller is absolutely correct that this draft opinion, if it is the final version by the court overruling Roe versus Wade, that it would threaten other unenumerated rights that have been found to be protected under both the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, as well as the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment. For example, the Griswold case, the right of contraception, the right to same-sex marriage, the right to interracial marriage. As we mentioned last week, there are soon to be two Supreme Court justices whose interracial marriages could be threatened if this opinion is adopted. I'm speaking, of course, of Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Attorney Grimes?
You know, the caller reminded me of a right to life case that I worked on some years ago where amniocentesis was not performed on the mother, and it was suspected that she was going to have a child with abnormalities, and then the doctor retested her without going through the amniocentesis, and it was stated that that first test result was a false positive. So in a way, the child was born with spina bifida and hydrocephalus. It had a large head and spine sticking out its back, horrific birth, that because of the expense of the amniocentesis may have been one of the reasons why that was not done to confirm the first test, that I forgot the method that was used, but that cost is going to be there no matter, it's there now. We just got a complex legal situation on hand, sir, that a lot of people are going to be affected by broadly with the birth of unwanted children for whatever reason there is. And it goes back to the simple thing that a woman has the same right as a white man, and we all do. And that is not being protected with this change of the law.
Is Attorney Alvarez still on the line?
Yeah, I'm still on the line. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, I'd actually like to go back to the first call. As the reality is, the leading cause of death is suicide. Why is that? It's a lot of times because of domestic violence. Because there's questions about, and there's issues where if the mother wants to move on, other wants to move on. This isn't not all men are violent. Issues of pregnancy, the way this and treating children, it really has a violent outcome in now where necessary.
Can't hear. She's breaking up.
Women have to have the right to choose. It's women's responsibility. And if it's safe, if the environment is safe to bring a natural responsibility. So while I believe I'm very pro-life in the way I think a woman deserves opportunity to have, it's also women's responsibility if it's a safe environment for that to happen.
She's breaking up a lot, Nate. I'm sorry, I'm missing every other word. Ms.
Yeah,
Adams.
I probably need to send her a link because, but anyway, she's not on, she's calling in and they hear it at the station, but not doing the broadcast that we're doing. But what also came out was one of our callers sent a text. What about young girls who are allowed to place their children, currently in the state law, they're allowed to place their children in safe boxes at firehouses. Now,
When they abandon them?
Yeah, would that now be considered a crime? That they've carved out this legislation, but in view of the fact that now you're saying this person have individual rights from conception, does that change those type laws?
Well, a birth child has certain protected rights, so I don't think that law necessarily changed, do you?
I don't know, because they allow, I see on the news this year, we've had a couple cases where women left their babies at firehouses and safe boxes. Mm-hmm. And it was on TV and they applaud the effort. The children are safe, and then the children can be adopted by a family who's seeking children, right? Well, but the issue though is that if you say the child is a legal person from birth, and then the issue becomes, does now the child get a legal right to have a guardian ad litem, become a legal process in order for you to do this procedure? And then does that type of procedure of safe house become something illegal also?
That is an interesting point, Attorney Lee. And also interesting is the fact that Justice Amy Coney Barrett, in her questioning during oral arguments posed the issue of whether or not these so-called safe houses could be an alternative to abortion. So in fact, mandating a woman to carry a baby to full term and then take that baby or put that baby up for adoption and or take to one of these alternative locations would be an acceptable alternative to aborting that fetus.
Well, it raised a number of issues, but I think moving forward is that, do you think that the marches and the protests will have any effect on these opinions?
On the justice's opinion?
Yes.
Marches and protests will have an effect. I think marches and protests does have an effect on the implementation or the interpretation of some of our laws, most definitely. So I'm giving it the same strength it has always had in our nation. I think protesting and marches could have an effect. Yeah, no.
I think
You go ahead.
I think we'll see. We've seen peaceful protest outside the justices' homes, which people have different opinions regarding that. And as you know, there are laws in place, and rightfully so, to protect the security of justices. And so again, more than 70% of citizens oppose overturning Roe v. Wade. And so we'll see if the public outcry has an effect or impact on the final decision. I also wanted to raise the point about this draft and how unprecedented it is for a Supreme Court draft opinion to be leaked. And there are 36 clerks and 4 are assigned to each justice. And those drafts, first, those drafts cannot leave the building. Each justice, they are double shredded and then they are burned. And so it'll be interesting to ultimately discover how that draft was ultimately leaked.
Well, you finished, Vanita?
Yes.
Okay, well, how do I say this? One's conscious and what's right and wrong sometimes rises above the rules that confine you to certain steps. So okay, now I'll say that, but I also say that, isn't it being seen that women, Republican women, are being affected by this particular reversing of Roe, and that there's a fear now that it may have a backlash effect on elections that are coming up in front of us for the rest of this year, and that the Republican Party just might be affected negatively as far as their position is concerned, in that they've stirred up a reaction by some of their voters that may be contra to the Republican Party position. So when you ask, will protest and have an effect, Nate, that's a possible outcome because of having this advance warning about this opinion, with this opinion, that we may see a little bit change in election results that's going to be coming about.
Well, one of our callers raised some salient points that kind of maybe summarize the importance of these issues. Pierre pointed out that the Republicans don't want to provide for children after they're born. They didn't support family for food stamps, Medicaid, and other benefits.
Mhm.
They gave billions of dollars to the wealthy in terms of tax breaks, and yet they're trying to obstruct a woman's right to determine what happened to their own body, but they don't want to do anything for the children after they're born, particularly in poverty situation. So it's a strange type process now, because you're taking away the right to for a woman to, and their doctor, make their own selection. At the same time, you're saying after they're born, they can go to hell. But let's go back to the line. We have a bunch of callers now. Let's see what's on the minds of our caller. Caller, you have a question for us? Hello?
Oh, hear me?
I can't hear you, caller. What did you say?
This is Rose. I can't hear.
Hey, Rose, I can hear you now, Rose. What's your question or comment?
Now. Oh, I want first place. I see no place in the Bible where it was said that man or anyone domination over.
Can't hear.
Why are they fighting so much about abortion? Why is there such? They don't want to.
I can't hear it, Nate.
But it's
Hey.
all about what to do, what not to do. Why are we fighting up here about producing, having more people? One group wants to support them, the other. There's something wrong with our political. There's too many people. No one should have anyone to say anything to say about the. Have the knowledge, talk. They want. I know this does not include those already on, but we grown people need to down and use our heads and stop talking, especially our political. Because they have no right to tell a woman to have a child or not have a child. That's God's choice. And if she's taught right, animal, rabbits, whatever, it's okay. But all of a sudden, it's not likable people. Person to tell a girl and a boy what their privates are for and what not to use them for, and that you should not indulge in sex. All these things.
Hey, producer, I can't hear her very well. Could you repeat her questions that she had? I couldn't hear it.
Her comment was that no one should be able to tell a woman or men what they do in their private lives, and they should be able to make that decision for themselves. And this is really a non-issue. She said there's nowhere in the Bible that says that men control women, or that was one of the leading comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next caller.
Say, Mr. Lee, how you doing?
I'm doing great, sir.
I was just wondering, how does this affect the laws that have been passed with the black man and that progress? Black man has progressed over what type of a setback with the Supreme Court? What kind of stopgap? The lawyers in the United States are going through the same thing, like me. Overturn Wade versus Roe versus Wade, dealing with abortion. They can overturn the law.
Okay, producer, can you repeat his question, please? I can hear it.
Me either.
He wants to know What will be the implications of this if Roe versus Wade is overturned on the Black man and the progress that Blacks have made? If they overturn Roe versus Wade, can they overturn other laws related to the progress for Black people?
Wow. Attorney Banks, got any comment on that? I have a whole lot, but I'll let everybody else chime in on that issue.
Absolutely. There could be an attack on Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 decision that overruled Plessy versus Ferguson, for example. In fact, a Mississippi politician recently suggested that Roe versus Wade could be reconsidered.
Yeah, generally speaking, sir, they can go back and overturn a lot of laws that affect Black people positively because of the political persuasion of the court at this time. That's the world we live in.
Well, see, we got to remember, caller, that the Dred Scott decision was decided back in 1857 by a similarly situated Supreme Court. It wasn't a unanimous decision that basically said that Dred Scott was property and didn't have rights of the citizens under the Constitution. So when you look at these decisions very carefully, what you see is that you could change the outcome of race relation in America, the status that we've enjoyed. These decisions could only be bad for a particular Black community, because this whole issue of abortion initially was simply a problem that existed by the slaveholders. They didn't want the slaves to get rid of their babies because they were property rights. So from a historical standpoint, the Black Americans were property. And so with that said, we're now saying that women, to a certain extent, are becoming property rights again. If they don't have the ability to make decisions themselves, this is the democracy, and one of the pinnacles of any democracy is that we have freedom of choice. And it's amazing to me that these so-called right-wing MAGA right Republicans think it's okay to take away a woman's right. Where do we stop? I just think it's a bad thing. And then we see so much misinformation. Right now, the United States hits a milestone. We hit a milestone in America. We have more jobs in this country than have people to fill them. We have 11.55 million jobs open in America, and probably got about 5 million people looking for jobs. So because of that, and then the president poll numbers down. So people get misinformation, and somehow there's a 30% of the country think that this abortion ban is a good idea. But they ignore the fact that the majority of people in the country are women. And so we passed the 19th Amendment to give women equal rights in this country. But at the same time, we now have the decision saying they don't have equal rights. So it's just baffling to me. It should be offensive to all Americans as to what this court is attempting to do, quite frankly. That's my comment on the issue. Attorney Bank, closing comment on this issue.
I think this issue is about control, and that there is no legislation regulating men's reproductive health. And it also speaks to the importance of voting in every election. I think this will be a pivotal issue in the upcoming November midterm elections. And it also speaks to the importance of knowing who your judges are in your communities, and specifically their opinion and position on a woman's right to make choices about her own body.
Attorney Grimes?
I think this case is about the rights of every human being to be free, to make choices for themselves. And if we reverse that right for women, it could reverse that right for others, regardless of gender, but of race. And so it's important that we preserve the right of a woman to control her body. That's what I believe.
I think the issue is so big, it's one of the most consequential decisions in the history of American democracy, because we're now legislating the rights of the majority population of this country. If we take away the rights of women, who are the majority population of the country, who's next?
Right.
This decision will affect everybody. Whether you're for abortion or against abortion, I don't think that's the issue so much. I think it's just the fundamental right of a person to be treated equally. Does women have equal rights with men? So does the Supreme Court of the United States take away the rights of women to be equal in this country again? We passed the 19th Amendment for a reason. We see in these foreign countries now, you see what's going on in Afghanistan, the declines of rights of women there. All over the world, when I looked at Russia in their parliament or whatever form of government it is, I saw nothing but men. So we're at a dangerous point in American democracy. We saw a violent insurrection of the country January 6th of last year. And where does this stop? If we take away the rights of women, folks, they're coming after your rights next. And so, strap up, because I tell you, this thing can't get better for us. If they take away the rights of women or minority next, we see a radical shift in the court, particularly in areas such as race discrimination. These MAGA judges are now against certain civil rights principles. And voting rights, we've lost certain voting rights, and they make it more difficult to vote in all these states. They created a false narrative that somehow the election was stolen, although the person who lost by 7.1 million votes. He got the most votes against him in the history of American democracy. So the person who lost the last presidential election in 2 elections has more votes against him being president than anybody who ever ran for office before. But yet they say this person, 30% of people believe they won. So the bottom line is this, folks. Like Attorney Banks said, she urged you, you got to vote like you never voted before. This election that we have this upcoming year, you got to start talking up with your neighbors and your friends and all our different mediums to make sure that we have the same type of turnout in 2022 that we had in 2020. These elections are consequential, and I tell you, the next election is going to be just as important as the last one. Well, thank you all for calling in today, our callers. We had some excellent points, but this issue won't go away. It's too big of an issue. So we'll continue on next week. And until then, God bless and keep you. And thank you for calling in today, our callers. And thank you all for listening on the show. And also, don't forget to join our show on YouTube. Thank you and have a blessed day, everyone. Goodbye.
All right.
Thank you.